Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, Parler, and Instagram. And of course, be sure to visit www.mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
Welcome home.
Mummy!
Why don't you tell me what happened to you in Marja?
I've been seeing things. Hallucinations. And it's not PTSD. I've been taking the pills.
That's the thing about war. Always leaves scars, and not all of them are physical.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 287. Out now in the US and releasing 11th of September in the UK is The Unfamiliar, a supernatural thriller that stars Jemima West as Izzy, a British Army doctor who returns from Afghanistan only to find that a demonic presence is haunting her family. Or is it? Taking known demonic possession movie tropes and turning them inside out, The Unfamiliar is a must-watch for those horror fans who want a good dose of mystery and originality along with their scares. Joining me now on the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is the director and co-writer of The Unfamiliar, Henk Pretorius. Henk, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Matt.
So this feels really interesting. There are a lot of different threads in the movie. It deals with supernatural. It's also a film about PTSD. It's also a film about a soldier's impact of returning back to normality, back to her family. A lot of things going on here. I'm just curious though, what was that initial first spark, that first idea that really got the ball rolling here and made you think to do this movie?
I think I want to make a film that's really about a mother keeping her family safe at all costs. And she's really, really not sure what exactly is going on, which is the horror mystery throughout of the film. So it's more of that the horror tropes are used as threads to put this mythical puzzle together. So I think that idea was the original thought.
It's really interesting how you had a woman in the role of the returning soldier. Usually in movies, the returning soldier is played by a male character. Not the case here, of course. You have a woman who's also a doctor, who's also a mother. From what I can tell in the movie, timeline-wise, it looked like she kind of had a newborn baby not long before she actually departed for Afghanistan as well. The decision to have a woman in the lead as a lead character, was that something that you wanted straight away, or is that something that kind of came about organically as you were developing the script?
It was originally a Marine from the US called Roger Cormack. And I kept writing this idea about him coming back from war or suffering from PTSD because something he did in the war in Afghanistan. And then I figured, well, it'd be more interesting to watch a British Army doctor coming back from war, going with the intent that she wanted to be a nurturer. But of course, the war made her into a soldier. And she essentially returning back from war with blood on her hands, metaphorically speaking, of course. So that was the idea, to organically move it more towards a female or mother character, yes.
What I really like about her character of Izzy is that she's a really proactive character, in that when she's confronted with what's happening with her, she uses her skills as a soldier and her intelligence as a doctor to really investigate what is happening. Was it always your intention to make sure that this character, when it was established, it was a woman, not to be of your typical kind of final girl, scream queen kind of stereotype?
Well, I come from a house where my mother played a crucial role, and she was an extremely strong person. And I think that, most of my films, ironically, is about female leads. Even before it was, inverted commas, popular to make your films about a female lead, my films always had strong female characters or female leads in them. And the reason for that is, I always looked at my mother as an inspiration of someone that could face danger by running towards it and trying to solve problems, opposed to being a a victim or a scream queen, as you rightfully said. So I think that the idea was to, my idea about gender is always you kind of decide what character you're going to be irrespective of your gender.
Right.
And I watch films because of the hero's strong character, and I get inspired by them. And so I was inspired by Izzy's character, and I think Jemima West, which played the lead role, that's kind of what drew her to the role as well. She said to me in initial discussions about taking on the film that she really likes the fact that Izzy runs towards danger.
Yeah. She kind of seems like the kind of person, and there is a little bit of hints here and there that maybe that's something that she did do. There's some physical scars as well as mental scars. So that is something that you kind of hint at there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's something, the whole film, if you look at a poetic classification, I suppose, of it, is written like a haiku. It's not a free verse. It's not a sonnet with a lot of information. It gives you small elements and small droplets of information that you have to pick up and piece the puzzle together. And what I found is some audience members really get it. Some audience members read other stuff into it, and some audience members it kind of passes them, and they think this film is maybe about PTSD or maybe about the haunted house theme or whatever. So what I try to do is, even in a backstory, is to just give the audience enough so that they can piece the puzzle together. And I really believe that as an audience member myself of horror films and other films, of course, that we are at a state now we don't need that much exposition anymore. We don't need to see her going back to war, seeing what actually happened. We can piece together the puzzle as we watch the film. Well, that's what I'm hoping for.
While we as an audience don't see that exposition, you and Jemima, did you work on a backstory for her? Was it in the form of diaries or in the form of anything else that kind of helped Jemima get into that mindset of that character?
Our initial discussions definitely helped. She also brought a lot to the role in terms of she's a thinking actress. So in the way she played the beats is quite reserved. She doesn't scream at all. She doesn't really get too scared at times. She's got quite a lot of guards up. And those characteristics, I suppose, is stuff that we discussed. And then in terms of a backstory, it is actually in the character brief, is the entire backstory as well as the Hawaiian mythology, and it was quite well researched, the Hawaiian mythology. And so all those things she's absolutely aware of. She knows where a character went, she knows what happened, and so she was informed about it, but it's more in the subtext that it comes across.
You mentioned before the Hawaiian mythology. That's a really interesting, unique angle that you brought to this specific subgenre of horror films. It's really unique because usually when it comes to these kind of horror movie, demonic possession kind of films, it deals with more Judeo-Christian concepts of the supernatural. In the case of the whole Hawaiian mythology aspect of it, how did that come across? And was that always there from the beginning? Did you start off going down the usual road of kind of like the Judeo-Christian concepts of these kind of territory? Or was it always something you wanted? Were you always seeking out something a little different to put into this film as compared to others?
To be honest, I brought in the PTSD element, and my co-writer brought in the Hawaiian mythology on day one. And that's how we were inspired to write the film. She lived in Hawaii for a bit, and she read all these thick books about Hawaiian mythology, and she started discussing the Magina, sacred rituals, the Pele, which is the Hawaiian god, with me, and all those things. And I was so interested because like the Magina, the faceless woman, makes a quick appearance in The Unfamiliar as well. She's actually an Asian myth, and so it's interesting how the Polynesian. I can never pronounce that word correctly. Sorry, this is my second language, but
that's okay.
It's very interesting how the Hawaiian culture drew from Japanese culture and so forth, where concerning the Magina, and where those stories actually come from. That became a Hawaiian folklore. And so she told me about all these stories, and it kind of inspired a new take, as you said, on the horror genre. Ironically, we reverted back to a more Christian mythology in the short film that The Unfamiliar is based on. So even though we already had the script with the infused Hawaiian mythology and all those things, we reverted back with the short film because we didn't want to give it away. We sort of wanted to keep that for the feature. And then we made the short film. It was the first short film I've ever made. I've made a couple of features before The Unfamiliar. First short film I've ever made, and I just wanted to try the crew and stuff and see how it is to shoot in Britain, because most of my films were shot in South Africa. So to answer your question, I think that the Hawaiian mythology was always there from day one. I wanted to do something unique, but again, I didn't want to delve into it in a way of giving too much away or making about the Hawaiian mythology, because it's to me about a mother trying to keep her family safe.
I read that you undertook some horror 101 before embarking into making this film. The producers of the film kind of dropped a box of horror films at your door and you kind of just went through them. I'm really curious, what films from that stack of movies that was handed to you really had the biggest impact on you, especially in regards to creating The Unfamiliar?
Well, it's funny because I know you're Australian based, and there's a film called The Babadook, of course, of Jennifer Kent, which definitely had an influence on me in terms of how she approached character versus thematic, and how she managed to tell a really, really compelling story through the horror genre, which I really appreciated. So that film definitely. And then in terms of other films, I loved a film called It Follows as well. I thought the rich thematic of basically, I would say, a sexual transmitted disease and how you use the transmitted disease and the thematic to make a horror film, I found really cool. And then Sinister. I loved Sinister in the way that he showed us just enough to be scared of, and how he used his lighting. And I think it's Derrickson, I think, that made Sinister.
Scott Derrickson.
Scott Derrickson, yeah, that's right. And so he used his lighting, and he shot the film extremely dark, and again with strong character narrative, good. And then there's so many, like even Stanley Kubrick, The Shining inspired me with some color choices, and you'll see like the film's got a 35 mil grade on it, which is a grade that's specifically for this film that Andy Lee, the colorist, did for us. And so there were so many films, and then of course James Wan. I mean, James Wan that brought cinema back into horror in the modern sense, I believe. But so there was quite a few films. Insidious, I suppose, to some level as well, although it's actually the ritual we used in The Unfamiliar is from a Hawaiian mythology. So I actually watched Insidious after I wrote the first draft with Jennifer Nicole Stang. And then we're like, oh, okay, so they used a similar device in their film as well. So to an extent, that film as well, but more The Conjuring and James Wan's other work as well.
I also read that when you watched those films, it drew you towards reinvesting yourself into religion. What did you mean by that statement?
What I meant was, I'm not religious, and I've never been really religious. And what I meant was basically it just scared me so much that I ended up praying the entire night.
Right.
And so quite literally drew me like not towards religion in the broader sense, but just that night after I watched The Conjuring, I couldn't stop praying. And there was a couple of moments in The Unfamiliar's pre-production where I also reverted back to prayer, especially when I started dreaming about the kahuna and not the kahuna, the kaimoni demon, which is a Hawaiian demon. Yeah.
Right. Very good. I was very curious when I read that, because I found that very interesting. So I myself am a huge horror fan, and the demonic possession kind of film, it's a newish kind of genre in that The Exorcist really ushered it in like the early mid-70s. But since like Paranormal Activity, there's been such an abundance of it. And so you kind of seen the same thing over and over. What I really appreciated about your movie is that it messes with the conventional. You approach familiar territory and then you do a 180. And I really love that about that film. Having going through that horror 101 and watching all those films, I'm sure you would have seen a lot of repetition as well. Were you thinking in your mind, I don't want to go down the same roads traveled before, and you really wanted to do something different? Even disregarding the whole Hawaiian kind of aspect as well, just messing with genre tropes, was that something that you really relished in wanting to do and doing while filming your movie?
I really it absolutely wanted to be original. But I wanted to tell an authentic story in terms of use the story world that I've created with Jennifer, and tell the authentic story within the rules we've created, the story rules, so to speak. So even the Kahuna demon, which I think you're referring to, is the idea was that she or it attaches itself to the tiki totem. And so I used very small clues in making that link. I don't think people have really figured that out yet, but that is actually and of course, because it's a demon and not a person, the ritual is different. And so that's kind of what I try to do, is trying to balance the tropes and use the tropes to guide and misguide the audience, but to use horror cliches and then flip it on its head to maybe confuse the audience, or to leave them with the idea of like they're not sure what is going on, and then use stuff they haven't seen before to guide them maybe to a solution or to the next obstacle, and then to try and flip that on its head as well. So I try to really tell a story that goes through quite a lot of tropes and I suppose and worlds, but still being true to the story rules we've created, and also to the emotive idea of a mother trying to keep her family safe. Yeah.
Your previous films that you directed were comedies, dramatic comedies as well. When you delve into making a horror film, what differences do you find, if any, with that kind of filmmaking compared to what you were doing beforehand?
I think it's the timing of horror and the timing of a laugh is similar. And I think Jordan Peele said that as well in one of his interviews. And he did some incredible comedy as well as incredible horror films. And then I think all story has so many good storytelling has similarities, where it's about character, it's about plot, it's about how you use the thematic and the resonance of that. And those golden threads are throughout all stories. And your intention as a filmmaker changes. Now, my intention with a comedy is, of course, to make people laugh and maybe feel good about themselves. And with a horror film, it's to scare them or leave them in suspense and to try and figure it out as they go along in this journey. Now, my biggest revelation by doing a horror film was that actually audience members walk out of the film scared, petrified, and sometimes quite upset with me. Whereas opposed to my previous films, they walk out smiling and hugging me. So that was really weird to me. Like I remember, like after a few screenings and test screenings, the audience would give it quite a high mark for a horror film, but they would walk out and they would look really irritated and quite depressed. And I would take offense, or not offense, I would be worried. And I would be like, oh, I don't know what's going on here. Until my producer turned to me and said, but you made a horror. You want them to look like that. And I was like, yeah. So that was that to me was quite a revelation in terms of what your intent is as a filmmaker. And I have to say, like, I'm holding to the thematic, and I'm sticking by the thematic. But to me, the story is about a mother trying to keep her family safe and trying to be the best version that you could possibly be to a family. Because that to me is the light in the darkness of this specific horror I made. But without that light, without that thematic, it's quite a being a first-time horror director, it was quite cruel for me to wanting to scare my audience or to jump scare my audience, But then I watched James Wan's interviews, and I was like, he's Australian as well. So yeah, I watched his interviews, and I was like, he's having so much fun. So I was like, okay, cool, maybe I should just have fun about it, So I think those are the differences to me. Yeah.
Did you also find that with horror? I mean, I believe that when it comes to filmmaking as a medium, horror really encompasses every single part of that medium that you can. I mean, from performance and direction and score, practical makeup effects, and everything in between. I think you have to use everything that you can within that medium to make a really effective horror movie. Did you find that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I was so schooled in the process of filmmaking. You know, in comedy, you can get away with a little less, I suppose, like filmmaking knowledge, because my background is actually theatre, and this is I think it's my 11th feature film or something, or I can't remember, like fourth or fifth one I've directed. I sometimes lose count a little bit, but this is the first film that really challenged me as a filmmaker of the craft of filmmaking, in terms of how does score create suspense, how do you create a jump scare with sound design, when to leave sound out, when to add it. And people like Henk Pretorius, which did the sound design and the final mix for me, and Walter Mio, who did the score, really, really, really delved into it with me and discovered it as we went along. And then another thing is lighting, like what to light and what not to light, and how you struggle when you've lit the wrong thing in post. And I don't mean like, of course, you light your subject, but what do you want to see in the background? Because if you want the film's color coding a little darker, it means whatever you didn't light up goes dark. So there were so many layers of filmmaking that I've discovered, and I think I've learned so much that I hope that it translates into the next film I make. You know, watching my other films now, I'm going, ooh, if I knew this about filmmaking, I could add this element into it and this element. So yeah, in terms of filmmaking as a medium, I've learned so much. Yeah.
We are in times now. A lot of people use the word uncertain times, which it's kind of become cliche in its own, but it's very true. What's really interesting to me about your movie is the global diversity aspect of it, of your cast and crew. You yourself are come from South Africa, as well as your producer partners. Your screenwriter, I believe she's from Canada or some North America as a whole. Your lead actress is from France. Harry McKillen Hunt, who plays young Tommy, is Australian, like I am. Rachel Lindsay from the UK. You got people from all around the world working on your one film. We are living in a time right now where that type of there's restrictions now in people coming together in that way. Do you think, as a film industry as a whole, where previously you could tap into talent from all around the world and have them come to one location and work on the one film, do you think those days, at least for the time being, are behind us?
I think it's more expensive to do that now. You know, you can't put someone like on a flight and pick them up at the airport. There's got to be stuff in place for that. You know, we're doing a film now in Europe somewhere, and we're flying people over there, hopefully in the next couple of months or weeks. And there's a huge procedure, obviously, to keep people safe, and we understand that. But the budget goes up with 20%. Yeah. So, you know, and it's always like the independent filmmakers. I always feel sorry for the producers when something like this happens, because in the end of the day, it's such a big risk to make a film. And they put so much behind this in terms of finance, and then it just becomes more difficult. But there's films like The Host. I don't know if you've seen that, where they made it over Skype or the Zoom calling, which seems to really work. So that's great. And there's other, you know, filmmakers and storytellers are so innovative. And I think we'll find ways to do that in any way. But yeah, I'm very privileged to be able to do a reasonable budget film for what we did it for, and to have all these incredible talents of my choosing fly into the UK to shoot it with me. I mean, that was really, really lovely.
One thing about horror movies is that you can almost always guarantee that a sequel could be around the corner. Not to give away too much in regards to the unfamiliar, but there is certainly potential for that. Any type of inkling as yet, any type of notes taken or script outlined so far for a potential continuation of the story of this family?
Absolutely. We've got we almost already commissioned it in terms of writing it. The outline is already done. But the thing is, I still want to see how the audience responds to it, if it's worth the effort and the finance to do so. But if it is, and the audience likes the film, yes, absolutely. It could be a play, it could be a television series, or it could be another film. I would love to make another one, yeah.
But before that happens, everyone out there, please do check out The Unfamiliar. It is available now in the US. September 11 comes out in the UK. Hopefully soon, Henk, we'll hear about a release date in Australia. Yeah,
we're busy talking to Australia as well. So it'd be awesome to release there as well. We definitely will. Harry McMillan Hunt, the young boy, is actually Australian, or his parents are Australian, and he grew up in Britain.
And for people who want to find out some more information, you can go to theunfamiliarmovie.com. Has all the info there. Henk, I thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. So, congratulations with the movie. Like I said during our questions, it's great to watch a horror movie where there's something unique towards it. Such a great character-driven movie as well. And so congratulations with you. Hopefully we can talk again in the future when it comes to future projects.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I really appreciate it, and all the best for you as well.